This episode is sponsored by my online training portal, which is designed by me to help you become a building forensics badass. You can get free access right now at buildingperformanceworkshop.com. Enjoy. Welcome to the Building Performance Podcast from the Building Performance Workshop. I'm Corbett Lunsford. Today we're talking about trends in performance-based construction and the building industry in general, especially from the international view, with Chris Dorsi, who is as international as it comes. Chris is the founder of the Habitat X think tank and also the author of a book that you might know called Residential Energy. Chris, thanks so much for talking with us today.
I'm glad to be here, Corbett. Thanks for inviting me.
So you're based in Spain nowadays, and so I'd like to ask, with your history in the U.S. and at the top of the industry everywhere you go, and now in Spain, what is building performance to you?
I guess that's the question of the day, Corbett, because for a lot of us who've been working on a thing we call high-performance housing or building performance, for years and years we've asked ourselves exactly that question as we determined exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. But I would say today, here in 2015, my hope is that what building performance really is just really, really good construction. And so I think of building performance really as the sum total of all the work that's already being performed by all the other tradesmen in the construction trades. And I think the day that we can take building performance and have honest-to-God integration into the construction industry at large, then we'll really have something.
Mainstream would be the best place for it. So in the interest of making it mainstream and making sure that this can happen, I think that we need to get our brains together and in the right place. And that's why you created Habitat X, right?
Yeah, that's correct, Corbett. I've worked for years in this industry in various parts. I've worked with utilities, with industry regulators. I've helped develop government programs. I've written technical standards. I've developed curriculum. I've trained people. I've written textbooks. And in the end, I find that, gee, there's plenty of information out there, and unfortunately I'm responsible for having created a lot of it, but it doesn't necessarily get put into use, or that sometimes the application of what we know is really good building science is actually very hard to apply. And so we rolled out the Habitat X conferences in 2012 with an intention to make that connection, to take the technology, the tools and techniques and materials that we really have in the bag, and work on ways of actually transferring those to the people for whom it matters. And part of what Habitat X does, Corbett, is it addresses the dearth of good understanding and leadership in the home performance world, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to fill that need.
And what's the difference? I mean, I have my own problems with the conference scene, but what is the difference between the Habitat X think tank and a typical conference that somebody would go to?
Well, it's been tempting to use the word conference in the outreach for this event, because that way people have some idea what it is they're going to attend. But, it was really designed as an event that takes advantages of everything that can't happen at conferences. Let me just tell you one brief story, which is really the inception of Habitat X. I was at a well-known conference in the United States, a place where there's 12 to 1,500 people every year, Corbett, and I sat in the back of the room in a session on ventilation. You've been there, and you know how sort of complicated and nuanced the details are, but there was a fellow in the front of the room who knows more about ventilation than probably any of 2 or 3 guys on the planet. And so what he had to say was indeed probably true and useful. But I was in the back row, kind of like the kids in the back of the bus, and there was this discussion which started among people in the back, in low voices, not being rude by any means, but there was a discussion which went back and forth, basically analyzing the points being made by that well-known presenter in ways that were, I thought, creative and very, very productive. And by the time the presenter finished his 45-minute presentation, the standard conference thing where he stands in the front of the room, he reads the slides, and then he says, now we'll take Q&A, and now we'll do some questions at the end. By the time we got to the end, this group of people in the back, 10 people, had already really taken the topic and gone someplace else with it, and synthesized the information and brought in other information they had. They were passing notes back and forth. People were passing tablets back and forth with websites they were looking at. All that group of people in the back of the room, Corbett, nobody stuck their hand up to ask the questions during the official Q&A period. We picked up, walked outside into the hall, and finished the conversation over the next 45 minutes. And I looked at that, and I thought, that's the conference I want to be a part of, where the kind of information can be shared, integrated, synthesized, and turned into solutions. And at the Habitat X events, we just do that right from the get-go.
The solution conundrum is a big one because I find that so when you go to these conferences that we're talking about, you sit in a room with 50 other people and somebody talks about an example of something. And I feel like this actually is a good amalgam for where almost everybody comes to this side of the industry from, which is through energy efficiency and specifically through weatherization programs and publicly funded stuff. And it seems like there's some solutions that are very broad, like for a Cape Cod style house, this is what you do. And for a condo, this is the approach that we're using. But really, in my experience in Chicago, at least, every house is different. And I'm coming up against these houses nowadays that have problems where I'm recommending things that are creative solutions, but I can't find any contractors to actually do them because they've never done it before and they're kind of afraid to. And I find that leadership requires a certain kind of mindset. Now, you came from home building, right? So how do you find that mindset of finding a creative solution for something and really going out on a limb is something that we can find a lot in the construction industry, or does that take a certain type of personality?
Well, I'll apologize for the construction industry for a minute because building contractors and all tradesmen are essentially a conservative lot. And I know that because I was one. And they're conservative because what those people really need to do is send their crews out in pickups and vans with tools and training to do exactly what they did last week without getting sued. And many of our experimental ideas that have been foisted upon various parts of the construction community have not worked out that well. And so these people are very, very hesitant to take on new ideas. Having said that, the task at hand is extremely difficult. And I think you pointed out well in your video recently about, if houses were built like cars or if cars were built like houses, they'd be built in the outdoors. And there is an essential problem we have there, and that is that every house is a hand-built house out in the weather, and there may be a set of plans, but it's impossible to follow them. They're all a little bit unique. And this really goes back ultimately to the discussion that we've all had in various different formats about prescription versus performance. And you'll see whole camps of people in our industries that get camped out saying that one or the other is correct. And usually they think the other one is evil. And it's really not like that. There surely needs to be prescription because after all, that's what the building codes are. And if you look at, for example, electrical wiring in a typical building, it works very, very well by prescription because of the types of components. You can give an electrician, a crew of electricians, the instructions for wire size, box capacity, raceways, grounding, et cetera, and it works every time. You never see electricians talking about performance testing, right? Like we're going to put a load on the circuit and see if it overheats and the wires melt. You never actually do that. So prescription works very well for some things, and it works very well for really 95% of the stuff we call home performance. But having said that, because of the complicated and nuanced nature of construction being out in the open and every building being a one-off creation, there's an element of performance testing needed just to confirm that things have been done correctly or that things have been installed properly that are hidden from view, or to help tradesmen actually check their work, or perhaps for quality control. But I believe there's no point in sending whole banks of crew people out there with basically baby computers to play building scientists doing so much performance testing that they spend all their time messing around with performance testing and not actually doing the retrofits we need to make buildings work properly.
Absolutely.
And so we need a combination of both in order to make it work. And that takes an intelligent and nuanced approach.
You mentioned getting sued, and as an American, I think of that as a uniquely American problem. Do you find that in Europe, suing somebody at the drop of a hat is a thing that's done?
Suing somebody at the drop of the hat is a uniquely American problem. Europeans laugh about it. Not that there's not strong legal guidelines here, not that people don't try to avoid doing bad things, but the idea of, oh my God, I'll get sued as being the first thing in mind is very, very chilling. And unfortunately, it's kind of buried at the stage into the American psyche, and it's very destructive.
Do you think then that building performance or performance-based measurement of buildings in Europe has an advantage over the American way of doing things because of that freedom?
I wish I could so simply summarize European building versus North American building, because I have studied it a lot for several years and very intensely for the last 18 months since I've been based in Madrid, Spain. It depends where you're standing when you ask the question. The question of litigation is a chilling influence in the United States, but there's, I guess, much bigger factors at play. For example, if I look at the performance of buildings, both for existing retrofits and new construction across Europe, it's widely varied. It's as if you looked at Canada, United States, and Mexico and tried to summarize them together. You can't do it.
Hmm.
And so,
But it's a union, right? Everything is the same.
I think there's a whole separate podcast there on the place for the European Union. The European Union is like it's been a version of a shotgun wedding, I guess, that not all parties have come to it willingly. I personally believe that it is really a necessary way to go into the future. Are there growing pains? Absolutely. Will there always be secession movements? Absolutely. That's just the nature of human behavior. When you take a group of people and put them this close together with this much intelligence and know-how and history and money to make investment and a future which is really tied together, there needs to be a union in order to help everybody move together. So, and I guess to answer your question then, so is the U.S. or Europe in a better position to build high-performance housing? I would say neither, but we could tear a few pages out of the books of a few European nations if we're in North America. For example, if you look at the example of what the Germans have done, they have simply made it quite illegal to build lousy buildings, and it really works. I really think that there is room for stronger government control in the building performance than anything we'll probably ever have in the United States. And I know there is a sense of strong individualism which runs throughout North American culture. And that strong individualism works really well when it comes to something like, what kind of fence am I going to put around my house, or what color am I going to paint my house? But when it comes to something with as important a social impact as the consumption of energy in a culture, that's the role for government to step in and say, here's what needs to be done, people, and here's how it will be done. And in fact, it's much more efficient than spending all your time spinning wheels, developing regional guidelines, which really are just reinventing the wheel.
I'm curious. So Germany is interesting to me because I went there a couple years ago and found I expected to see that all of these buildings were super high performance and fantastic. And actually, what I saw in some places was that the buildings that were built with almost no money and in a super big hurry after World War II are still standing. And so to me, that says, oh, wow, they are trying to build such good buildings now because they've got these buildings that they hate. They hate their guts, and they're ugly, and they perform terribly. So do you think that across the pond where we are in the U.S., that the more publicity there is about how bad the building stock is now, the more upset the public gets about it, the faster we get to where Germany is?
I think you embedded about 3 questions and assumptions in there.
Respond.
I don't think the American people, the North American people, because really I kind of take the Canadians and Americans as having a sort of a similar path and approach and set of resources, et cetera. I don't think the North American people are going to be moved by a story of how poorly performing their houses are. You and I know it's true. And we have the same problem the Germans have, and that is that all these people came back from the Second World War. The GI Bill provided lots of money. There was housing thrown up so quickly, and you look at all these tracts built 50s, 60s, 70s, and yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Having said that, if you look at the 110 to 130 million single-family homes in North America, it is an important housing piece of our housing stock, which we can't ignore. And so, surely we need to keep moving forward with our protocols for retrofitting those homes to make them as efficient and safe and durable as we possibly can. But it is a long battle, and we'll never get to the end of it because, of course, by the time we do, especially at the rate we're working houses now, when we finally get to the last one in 50 years, it's going to be like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. We're going to have to start all over again and go back to the first ones anyway. So what we really require is a process of continuous improvement. And I think every developed nation on earth has that same problem because there's existing housing stock from early wealthy periods, and yeah, it's got to be acknowledged.
Are you concerned about commercial buildings as well?
Well, absolutely. And commercial buildings are really less of an issue because they are easier to get to. witness, Corbett, the problem we have, the discussion which is ongoing at Habitat X and here on these podcasts, I'm sure, about how do we get inside the mind of the homeowner? What is it about people? They don't care about their own house. And, that is an ongoing problem. Again, 135 million single-family homes. Each one of those homeowners has to be turned to come to the light side, to the side of understanding about high-performance housing. Commercial building owners, managers are much easier to get to because they're really prone to dollars and cents arguments. They understand the value of an audit. They understand the value of continuous improvement. They're willing and able to make capital expenditures. And if you look, even during hard economic times, as we see in Europe and North America right now, I can assure you that the owners of commercial and industrial buildings have plenty of capital available to upgrade those buildings if it's rational. I'm doing a lot of work with commercial and industrial buildings here in Europe right now. Yeah, money is tight, but I actually see more progress there than I do on residential.
Interesting. Okay. And what do you think is on the horizon for buildings or the construction industry in general, especially where performance is concerned? Is there anything that you're excited about?
Yes, there is. That's actually that's the very topic of Habitat X Summer National. It is every year because part of what we do at this summer think tank is we engage in a process of visioning, and that is we take stock of where we stand today. We look at some short-term work that needs to be done and some predictions for, in this case, we throw out a 3-year view, what's going to happen in all of our various industry sectors and all the sectors represented by people at Habitat X. We identify where the movement is and make sure that our people are in a position to take advantage of that so they're not blindsided by changes and evolutions in things like codes and regulations and requirements and opportunities like new methods and materials and cultural shifts like different methods of telling a story, different methods of outreach and marketing. We look at that in order to build a short-term plan, but while we're at it, we try to throw out, in this session we're going to throw out 15 years, go to the year 2030. And so there's a great visioning process that happens there. And here's my crystal ball today. Here's the things that I think are going to be hot right now. They may not be in 3 years. It's going to be a different set. Every year it's different. But a couple of things I see really big. One is the advent of new, very, very functional finance schemes. There are opportunities for financing right now tied to especially renewables like PV, but also the home performance, which didn't exist before. We've had a thing called energy efficient mortgages for years, promulgated by the federal government. It basically was stillborn. It never ever got going. It was used in some small markets here and there. But today there's companies out there who installing PV on residential and light commercial buildings at no cost to the owners. It's 100% financed, or there's venture capital behind it. These are not pie in the sky financing schemes. These are real. Go talk to Trey Muffett at Renewable Funding and some of the work that they're doing there out in California. It's fabulous. Very, very hopeful. The other piece I see, number 2, is what I'm thinking of, and we've got a session on this topic at Summer National, is disruptive photovoltaics. When I started working in photovoltaics about 12 or 15 years ago, we were paying $10, $12, $15 a watt. It dropped to $8 a watt. This is the installed price of panels in a residential environment. Now it's under $3. And so the economics of scale have definitely come to play with the advent of potentially, retail level battery storage. Everything's going to change. There's an important piece tied to this too, Corbett, and it's the thing I think of as grid destabilization. And you better believe that utility company executives know all about this and are making adaptations to their systems in order to make sure that they can remain as viable business operations, and that the advent of distributed generation like PV does not actually hurt their operations. And some people will sort of view the utilities as the bad guys, as the adversaries, and I'll say right now, that is dead wrong, because without the grid, we don't really have a system. In fact, without the grid, most renewables aren't worth much unless you're willing to build a standalone system, which some people may do, but there's really no point. The grid makes renewables whole. We need the grid in good shape. We need it run by profitable ventures, and we need the cooperation of the grid owners and managers. And so I think that's going to be an important piece. And I think the next crystal ball thing out there is, I'm going to place this in the long view. and I don't quite know, I hope this bet doesn't come true, but this one is political instability. There's stuff going on in the Middle East and Russia right now, which could change the political landscape of the entire world overnight. If that happens, a couple of simple things are going to be obvious, and that is it's going to increase the price of fuel and make conservation look a little more attractive. But of course, it's going to change the flow of goods and materials and energy around the planet in ways which are going to require organizations everywhere to adapt. So those are my three crystal ball pieces.
Awesome. I think that two of them are very hopeful with no bad side effects at all, and the one sounds very interesting at the very least, if that comes true. And I'm with you.
Yeah, let me put a positive twist on that. So political instability could cause the price of fuels, especially combustible fuels, but also electricity to rise, and disrupt some flow channels, some distribution channels. But having said that, we got so many renewables coming online, especially in Europe and North America right now, and it is exactly the antidote to that problem, because there is great political stability in having efficient buildings that have in transportation and factories, and there's great stability in knowing where your sources come from. So I see opportunities here, and so let the minor conflagrations happen wherever they will. I think it is the organizations, the municipalities, the states, the countries who can identify good, solid, reliable, distributed forms of generation who will be in the best position then. And that's a good place for us to work.
Awesome. Well, we will have many more conversations. I can feel it right now. Chris Dorsi, thank you so much for taking time with us today.
Corbin, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Chris is the founder of the Habitat X think tank. You have been listening to the Building Performance Podcast. I'm Corbett Lunsford. Tune in next time.